Welcome back to our channel, where we remember the lives of those who left us too soon. Hollywood has seen many iconic female stars who shined brightly, captivating audiences with their talent and presence. But behind the fame, some battled silent struggles that ultimately led to tragedy. Today, we pay tribute to the American female celebrities who lost their lives due to overdose, gone too soon, but never forgotten. Judy Garland was a once-in-a-lifetime talent, a voice that could shake the heavens and a presence that lit up the silver screen. But behind the dazzling performances was a woman whose life was filled with struggle, heartbreak, and ultimately a tragic end. Born Frances Ethel Gum on June 10, 1922, she was a child performer, singing alongside her sisters before Hollywood came calling. MGM signed her at just 13, and soon she became a household name, stealing hearts as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, her voice soaring as she sang Over the Rainbow. That song became her anthem, a symbol of dreams just out of reach, much like happiness seemed to be for her. Garland's career was a triumph. Her films, her albums, her concerts, all brilliant, all unforgettable. But fame came with a price. The pressure of stardom crushed her from an early age. Studio executives forced her into extreme diets, gave her stimulants to keep her working, and sleeping pills to make sure she got some rest. She lived in a cycle of exhaustion, always expected to be perfect, always needing to be on. She battled with self-doubt, was told she wasn't beautiful enough, not thin enough, never enough. That damage followed her for the rest of her life, and over time, the weight of it all became too much. Her personal life was tumultuous, 5 marriages, financial troubles, and a lifelong battle with addiction. By the 1960s, she was still performing, still captivating audiences, but her health was failing. The years of substance abuse, stress, and emotional turmoil had taken their toll. By 1969, she was in London, married to her 5th husband, Mickey Deans, but she was fragile, barely holding on. Then, on June 22, at just 47 years old, she was found lifeless in the bathroom of her rented home. An overdose of barbiturates, the drugs that had been given to her as a teenager to control her, finally silenced her. The coroner ruled it accidental, but in truth, it felt inevitable. She had been running on empty for years, her body worn out, her spirit exhausted. Her death shook the world. But it wasn't just the loss of a star. It was the loss of a woman who had given everything she had, until there was nothing left to give. At her funeral, James Mason spoke the words that would define her legacy. She could wring tears out of hearts of rock. She gave so richly and so generously that there was no currency in which to repay her. Decades later, her music, her films, and her story remain unforgettable. A haunting reminder of the price of fame and the fragility of even the brightest stars. Amy Winehouse was one of the most unique voices of her generation, a singer whose raw talent and deep, soulful voice made her a global icon. But her life was marked by struggle, pain, and a tragic end that the world saw coming yet couldn't prevent. On July 23, 2011, Amy was found unresponsive in her Camden home in London, her bright light extinguished at just 27 years old. The official cause was alcohol poisoning, with reports stating that her blood alcohol level was more than 5 times the legal driving limit. Just a day before, she had spoken to her doctor, seeming sober and in good spirits. But behind closed doors, she was battling the same demons that had plagued her for years: addiction, mental health struggles, and the pressures of fame. She had tried to quit drinking multiple times, but her body, weakened by years of abuse, couldn't handle the sudden shifts. That night, alone in her bedroom, she drank heavily, and her body simply gave out. Amy had been spiraling for years, her struggles documented by relentless paparazzi and played out on front pages around the world. Just a month before, she attempted a comeback performance in Serbia, but she was too intoxicated to even stand properly, slurring her lyrics as fans watched in disbelief. It was heartbreaking to see. This was a woman who had once been unstoppable, whose music had touched millions. Amy wasn't just a singer, she was a force, her voice dripping with emotion, telling stories of heartbreak, love, and pain in a way no one else could. Born in London in 1983, she grew up in a musical household, influenced by jazz and soul legends. By her teens, it was clear she had something special, and she was signed to a record label early on. Her debut album, Frank, was a success, but it was Back to Black that made her a legend. The album, fueled by her personal struggles, gave the world songs like Rehab and You Know I'm No Good, and it won her 5 Grammy Awards in one night, making her the first British woman to achieve that. But behind the success was a woman in pain. Her tumultuous relationship with Blake Fielder Civil was filled with toxicity, drugs, and heartbreak. And when they separated, Amy spiraled even further. She battled addiction, bulimia, and depression. And though she had moments of clarity, brief stints in rehab, attempts at sobriety, it was never enough. The media hounded her every move, and the world watched as she unraveled in front of their eyes. In the end, Amy Winehouse became another tragic member of the 27 Club, joining legends like Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix, artists who burned too bright, too fast. Her death wasn't shocking, but it was still devastating. She had so much more to give, but her demons won. Even today, her music lives on, her voice still as haunting and powerful as ever, a reminder of both her extraordinary talent and the pain she carried. The world lost Amy Winehouse far too soon, but her legacy will never fade. Anna Nicole Smith's life was a whirlwind of fame, controversy, and deep personal tragedy. But it was her shocking and untimely death that left the world stunned. Once a small-town girl from Texas, she rose to international fame as a model, an actress, and a tabloid sensation. But behind the glamorous image was a woman who faced endless battles, from legal fights over fortune to personal struggles with loss and addiction. On February 8, 2007, at just 39 years old, Anna Nicole was found unresponsive in her hotel room at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Florida. Her bodyguard and a nurse tried desperately to revive her, but by the time she arrived at the hospital, she was already gone. The official cause of death was a lethal mix of prescription drugs, with the sedative chloral hydrate being the main factor. She had been taking multiple medications, including powerful painkillers and anxiety drugs, which together created a deadly cocktail in her system. No illegal drugs were found, but it was clear that her body had been overwhelmed by the substances meant to numb her pain. In truth, Anna had been spiraling ever since the devastating loss of her son, Daniel, just months earlier. He had been her world, her anchor, and when he died unexpectedly in her hospital room, just 3 days after she had given birth to her daughter, Anna was never the same again. He had overdosed on a mix of methadone and antidepressants, and the grief consumed her completely. She tried to move forward, even fighting a bitter paternity battle over her newborn daughter. But those closest to her said she was barely functioning, lost in sadness, and relying more and more on medication to get through each day. Her final weeks were filled with chaos, public appearances where she seemed dazed, rumors about her health, and increasing concerns about the people controlling her life. The woman who had once been a glamorous guest model and a larger-than-life TV personality was now fading before everyone's eyes. She had built her career on beauty, on Marilyn Monroe-like allure, on the scandal of marrying an 89-year-old billionaire. But in the end, her story became one of loneliness, legal fights, and a desperate attempt to hold on to happiness. Her funeral, held in the Bahamas, was filled with heartbreak as she was finally laid to rest beside her son, the only place she ever truly wanted to be after he was gone. Even in death, the battle over her life continued, with court cases over her estate, her daughter's paternity, and the circumstances surrounding her overdose. But beyond the headlines, Anna Nicole Smith was simply a mother who had lost her son, a woman who had spent her life searching for love, and a person whose tragic ending felt painfully inevitable. Janis Joplin was a force of nature, a voice that could shake the heavens. But behind the wild energy and untamed talent was a woman who struggled with loneliness and addiction, a battle that would ultimately take her life. On October 4, 1970, at just 27 years old, Janis was found dead in her hotel room at the Landmark Motor Hotel in Hollywood, the victim of a heroin overdose, a tragedy that silenced one of the most electrifying performers in rock history. In her final days, Janis was in the middle of recording what would become her final album, Pearl, pouring her soul into every note, seemingly at the peak of her career. But beneath the surface, she was fighting demons that never let go. She had been using heroin again, a habit she had tried to kick multiple times. But that weekend, the dose she took was stronger than she expected. Her dealer had been selling a dangerously potent batch that had already claimed other lives. Alone in her room, she collapsed beside her bed, a cigarette still clutched in her hand. Her body discovered only when she failed to show up for a recording session the next day. It was a cruel, lonely end for someone who had spent her life chasing connection, pouring everything she had into music that resonated with raw emotion and pain. Janis had always been different, a misfit from Port Arthur, Texas, who never quite fit in, bullied for being unconventional, drawn to the raw, aching blues of legends like Bessie Smith, whose music spoke to something deep inside her. She found her escape in music, her voice an explosion of pain, passion, and defiance, rising to fame with Big Brother and The Holding Company before striking out on her own, leaving behind unforgettable songs like Piece of My Heart, Cry Baby, and the hauntingly prophetic Mercedes-Benz, recorded just days before she died. She wasn't just a singer, she was a phenomenon, a woman who lived fast, loved hard, and gave everything she had to her audience. But in the end, fame couldn't fill the emptiness she carried inside. Her death was a heartbreaking loss, another bright star gone too soon, joining the infamous 27 Club, alongside Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and later Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse, artists whose brilliance burned too fiercely for this world. But Janis Joplin's voice never faded. Her music, her spirit, her defiant, untamed soul still echoed through time, reminding the world of the woman who sang like she was on fire and lived like tomorrow would never come. Dorothy Dandridge was a trailblazer, a star who shined in a world that often refused to see her light. She was an actress, a singer, and the first black woman ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in Carmen Jones. She captivated audiences with her elegance and talent, performing at legendary venues like the Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater. But behind the glamour was a woman struggling against racism, heartbreak, and a world that never made room for her the way it should have. Her final days were marked by deep pain, both emotional and physical. On September 7, 1965, she had a long phone conversation with a close friend, swinging between hope and despair, even singing Barbra Streisand's People in its entirety. Just hours later, she was found unresponsive in her West Hollywood apartment. She had fractured her foot days earlier, but it was a lethal mix of antidepressants that took her life, or so it seemed. The coroner initially ruled her death an accidental overdose, but later findings suggested a fat embolism from her injury may have been the real cause. She was only 42, a woman once destined for Hollywood greatness, reduced to a lonely, tragic end. Dorothy's life had been filled with struggle, abandoned by her husband while pregnant, raising a daughter with severe disabilities, swindled out of her earnings, and forced to sell everything she had. Despite it all, she fought for better roles, for representation, and for a career that transcended the limitations placed on black women in Hollywood. She had talent beyond measure, but the industry never truly let her thrive. And when she needed help the most, she was left alone. Her death was not just the loss of a great actress. It was the loss of a woman who had given so much and received so little in return. Today, Dorothy Dandridge is remembered as a pioneer, a woman who opened doors for so many who came after her, even though those doors were often slammed in her face. She should have had the world, but instead, she was left with broken dreams and an empty apartment. Gilda Radner was a shining star in the world of comedy, bringing laughter to millions with her unforgettable characters on Saturday Night Live. But behind the laughter was a heartbreaking struggle that would ultimately take her life far too soon. Born on June 28, 1946, She grew up in Detroit with dreams of performing, a love she shared with her father until his tragic passing when she was just 14. That loss shaped her, but it never stopped her from chasing her dreams. She became one of the original SNL cast members, creating hilarious and beloved characters like Roseanne Rosenadana and Emily Latella, earning an Emmy and a place in television history. She went on to have a successful career in film and theater, meeting the love of her life, Gene Wilder, along the way. But just when life seemed perfect, everything changed. In 1986, Gilda began experiencing persistent pain and fatigue, symptoms that doctors brushed off for nearly a year. She was misdiagnosed multiple times, her pain dismissed, her concerns overlooked, until it was finally revealed that she had stage 4 ovarian cancer. By then, it was too late. The disease had already spread. She underwent aggressive treatments, enduring surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. But the battle was brutal. Through it all, she remained hopeful, even writing her memoir, It's Always Something, where she shared her struggles with raw honesty. For a brief moment, it seemed like she had won. She went into remission, and there was hope. But cancer is cruel. It returned with a vengeance, leaving her frail and weak. In May 1989, she was admitted to the hospital for a routine scan, but a sedative reaction put her into a coma. Joan Wilder held her hand as she took her final breath on May 20th, 1989, at just 42 years old. The world lost a comedic genius that day, but her legacy didn't fade. Her death sparked awareness about ovarian cancer, leading to early detection programs and research in her name. She was more than just a comedian, she was a fighter, a woman who turned pain into laughter and left a lasting impact on comedy and the fight against cancer. Gilda's light may have gone out too soon, but her laughter, her spirit, and her bravery live on. Peggy Lee, the legendary American singer and songwriter, lived a life full of music, passion, and triumphs. But her final years were marked by a slow decline in health, a battle she fought with the same quiet strength that defined her career. Born Norma Dolores Ekstrom on May 26, 1920, in Jamestown, North Dakota, Peggy endured a tough childhood, losing her mother at the age of 4 and facing hardship at home. Music became her escape, her voice a beacon that would take her from small-town radio gigs to the heights of stardom. She was discovered by Benny Goodman in the early 1940s, and from there, her sultry, soft vocals set her apart in the jazz and pop music world. With hits like Fever and Is That All There Is, she crafted a unique style that oozed sophistication and emotion, making her one of the most influential female artists of her time. But while the world saw the glamorous Peggy Lee behind the scenes, she was dealing with struggles that would eventually take a toll on her body. Her later years were plagued by serious health problems. Diabetes, strokes, and heart issues forced her to slow down, but she never truly stopped. Even in a wheelchair, she continued to perform, refusing to let illness steal her love for music. By the late 1990s, her condition worsened, and she was often confined to her home, where she spent her final days surrounded by memories of a lifetime spent in the spotlight. On January 21, 2002, at the age of 81, Peggy Lee suffered a fatal heart attack at her home in Bel Air, California. It was a quiet end for a woman whose voice had once lit up the biggest stages, a heartbreaking loss for fans who had been mesmerized by her music for decades. She was cremated, and her ashes were laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, marking the final chapter of a life that had given so much beauty to the world. Though she is gone, her voice, her songs, and her undeniable influence on music will never fade. Peggy Lee wasn't just a singer. She was a force, a trailblazer, and a true legend whose legacy continues to inspire generations of artists and music lovers alike. Shannon Hoon was a soul unlike any other, a voice that carried both raw pain and boundless joy, a poet lost too soon. Born on September 26, 1967, in Lafayette, Indiana, he grew up in a small town with big dreams, drawn to music from an early age. He found his calling when he formed Blind Melon in 1990. a band that would go on to capture the spirit of an era with their unique sound. His friendship with Axl Rose led him to contribute vocals to Guns N' Roses' iconic albums. But it was Blind Melon's breakout hit, No Rain, that solidified his place in music history. Hoon's mesmerizing voice and haunting lyrics resonated with millions. But behind the success, he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. His struggles with substance abuse were well known. Rehab stints, arrests, and erratic behavior became part of his story. He had moments of hope, like the birth of his daughter Nico Blue in July 1995. But addiction was a shadow that never left him. In October of that year, Blind Melon was back on tour promoting their album Soup, and Hoon's demons were taking their toll. He had hired a drug counselor to keep him in check, but after only a week, the counselor was dismissed. Then came October 20th, 1995, Houston, Texas. Hoon performed what would be his final show, a night that left fans uneasy. He was visibly unwell, lost in a haze, his energy erratic. After the show, he spiraled into an all-night binge, a destructive ritual he couldn't escape. The next morning, as the band's tour bus sat parked in New Orleans, their sound engineer went to wake him, but Shannon wouldn't wake up. Panic set in, an ambulance was called, but it was too late. At just 28 years old, he was gone, taken by a cocaine overdose, his body unable to withstand the years of abuse. His death was a tragic end to a talent so rare, a life so full of promise. He was buried in his hometown, his gravestone inscribed with lyrics from his song, Change, words that spoke of hope, of leaving a mark on the world. Blind Melon tried to carry on, but the heart of the band was gone, and nothing could replace the magic that was Shannon Hoon. Over the years, his legacy has lived on in tribute albums, books, and even a documentary made from the personal footage he shot throughout his short life. His music continues to touch those who hear it, a reminder of both the beauty and the fragility of life. He was a dreamer, a poet, a father, a musician who burned too bright and left too soon, another soul lost to the cruel grip of addiction, forever frozen in time as the barefooted, carefree voice of a generation that still mourns him. Kristen Pfaff was a rising star in the grunge scene, a gifted musician whose talent on the bass guitar set her apart. But her life came to a devastating end on June 16, 1994, when she was found dead in her Seattle apartment from a heroin overdose at just 27 years old. She had been planning to leave Seattle that very day, ready to move back to Minneapolis and leave behind the darkness she had fallen into. Her friend Paul Erickson found her lifeless body in the bathtub, a bag of syringes nearby, a heartbreaking scene that marked the tragic end of a life filled with so much promise. Kristen's struggles with addiction had started after she moved to Seattle to join Hall, the band that would bring her mainstream success, but also lead her into a toxic environment where heroin was everywhere. She had been clean for months, having checked herself into rehab earlier that year, and had just finished touring with her old band, Janitor Joe. Everyone thought she was on the path to recovery, but something pulled her back in, and on that fateful night, she made one last fatal mistake. Kristen had been deeply affected by the death of her friend Kurt Cobain just 2 months earlier, and many close to her believed his death had shaken her more than she let on. Born on May 26, 1967, in Buffalo, New York, Kristen grew up surrounded by music, learning classical piano and cello before teaching herself to play bass. She was not just a musician, but a fiercely intelligent and passionate person, studying women's studies at the University of Minnesota and working as a counselor for victims of sexual violence. She formed the band Janitor Joe in the early 90s and quickly gained attention for her aggressive, yet melodic bass playing. That talent caught the eye of Courtney Love and Eric Erlandson of Hole, who pursued her relentlessly until she finally agreed to join them. Moving to Seattle should have been the start of something great, but instead, it led her down a dangerous road. The music scene was filled with addiction, and despite her initial resistance, Kristen fell into the same trap. She helped shape Hole's breakthrough album Live Through This, bringing a depth and power to the band's sound. But behind the scenes, she was struggling. Her relationship with Eric Erlandson was complicated. Her friendships with people like Cobain were emotionally draining, and the pressures of fame were mounting. When Cobain died in April 1994, something changed in Kristen. She seemed more determined than ever to leave Seattle, to get clean, to reclaim her life. She made plans to return home, packed up her things, and even had her friend waiting to drive her back to Minneapolis. But for reasons no one will ever fully understand, she used heroin one last time, and it killed her. Her death, so soon after Cobain's, left another wound in a music scene already drowning in loss. Hole dedicated their first show after her death to her, and her mother accepted an induction into the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame on her behalf. A scholarship was created in her name to support young artists, and her legacy as a musician and advocate lives on. But the pain of her loss lingers, another life stolen by addiction, another talent gone too soon. Kristen Pfaff was more than just a bass player. She was a force, a brilliant, kind, and complicated person who should have had so much more time. But in the end, like too many others, she was swallowed by the very scene that had given her a voice. Their time was brief, but their legacy will live on forever in the hearts of their fans.